Welcome everyone to today's program, which is sponsored by the Plant Initiative, Revered Roots, Ancestral Teachings and Plant Wisdom, a conversation with LoriAnn Bird. I'm Paul Moss, Executive Director of the Plant Initiative, and I'm very excited to introduce LoriAnn and moderator Keith Williams and to start off our 1 hour program. LoriAnn Bird is an Indigenous Métis herbalist, educator, and author with a deep knowledge of wild, medicinal, and edible plants that grow in everyday spaces. Through LoriAnn's eyes, our immediate surroundings take on a new life and offer a wealth of untapped nutritional and ecological resources. LoriAnn's vision is to continually co-create insightful dialogues to remediate and reconcile with our indigenous plants as we reintroduce them into our urban landscapes. By sharing and growing these practices, communities can access our true local foods and medicines, which support collective resilience and deep ecological healing for all species. As a refugee of the Red River Métis Nation, born and raised on the Coast Salish lands of British Columbia, LoriAnn is deeply grateful to live, play, and create primarily on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples. Moderator Keith Williams is an assistant professor in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University. His work focuses on better understanding how to be good relations with our more than human kin, particularly plants and fungi. Keith draws heavily on post-human philosophy, indigenous thought, and his lived experience with family members, human and otherwise. Keith is also a board member of the Plant Initiative. The program will start with about 30 minutes of discussion between LoriAnn and Keith. For the remainder of the program, LoriAnn will be responding to questions posed by you, the attendees, that will be presented by Keith as selected from questions that are posted in the Zoom chat. So we encourage you to please suggest a question for LoriAnn to discuss by posting it in the chat at any time, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. This program is being recorded and will be posted online on the Plant Initiative's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who registered. With that, I'm turning over the program to Keith.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I have to say, it's a real pleasure to be here again. And what a pleasure it's been to get to know you, LoriAnn, over the past little while as we prepared for this. I'm joining today from Mi'kma'ki, or Nova Scotia, the unceded and ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people. And I would like to take a moment to invite all of you to share your any kind of territorial acknowledgements or reflections in the chat as you feel comfortable doing so. As most of us are aware, American Thanksgiving has recently passed, and my thoughts turn to the chaos and harm that south of the arbitrary border separating present-day Canada from the US, especially towards our trans and so-called illegal siblings, many of whom are from Mexico, Central America, and South America. I'd like to take a moment and share a Haudenosaunee teaching that I learned from elders and knowledge keepers over the years. And part of my own family on my father's side is from a Haudenosaunee community on the northern shores of Lake Ontario. Although I don't identify as Indigenous, I really value Indigenous and specifically Haudenosaunee teachings and lifeways. So in the Haudenosaunee world, there's a ceremony called the Handangariwadekwa, or the Thanksgiving Address, and that basically encourages us to express gratitude for the many elements of creation that sustain humanity, recognizing that without the waters, the fish, the three sisters, the medicine plants, and more, we would not exist. The profound and nuanced relational reciprocity inherent in Indigenous teachings from across Turtle Island are the antidote to the uninitiated, immature masculinity that is threatening life on this continent and on the earth as a whole. I'm very excited that LoriAnn is here to share her work with us, and I hope that we can all reflect on Indigenous teachings more broadly around what it means to be grateful and the kind of reciprocity that this understanding demands of us when we consider all the other beings and lives, human and otherwise, that make our lives possible. Okay. And with that, I think we can just start in on the questions. LoriAnn, are you feeling ready?
Yes, Keith, I'm here. I'm here to, to share. I also just want to, acknowledge that I here am on the lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. Sometimes in these acknowledgements, it's really important that we sort of really speak a harsh truth, and that is that these lands are stolen and they're occupied here. And it's in that truth that, we can start to really think about how we can change the relationship, how we can really give back and create reciprocity with our neighbors. I also just want to mention my deep gratitude to Paul for accepting my request to come and sit with you today. And also to you, Keith, for this conversation that we're going to have. And all the folks that signed up, I see some faces on my screen. So I always love to see that, that there are others here truly sitting and watching and listening. And that, it's such a great program, the Plant Initiative. And Paul was just reminding us that it's Giving Tuesday. So, thinking about where you want to give today, I think is a good reflection.
Thank you, LoriAnn. My first question for you, from my understanding, Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island are characterized by both rootedness in territory and migration. Every Indigenous nation has a traditional territory and stories of forced displacement due to, for example, massive hydroelectric projects, along with chosen seasonal or more permanent migration patterns define what it means to be Indigenous here. Your personal story aligns with this broader pattern. Can you tell us a bit more about what it means to be Red River Métis in Squamish territory? How did you grow into or become with your Métis identity as an adult while living in another nation's traditional territory?
Thanks, Keith. Well, I appreciate the reflection here. And, my birth lands are on the lands of the Squamish people. So this is where I was born during a partial lunar eclipse, full moon in 1963. And, walking those lands and being on those lands as a child, this was my imprint. And of course, way back in the 60s and the 70s, people weren't really acknowledging where they were from or reclaiming history. And, I do remember as a child, coming to the kitchen table and the aunties and the uncles and the grandmothers, speaking of our history as Red River Métis. My maternal grandmother was Esther Dumont, so part of the Dumont clan. And then my paternal grandfather, Adolph Campion, was the grandson, of Cuthbert Grant Jr., the Battle of the Seven Oaks. So here was these stories as a child, but not really acknowledging that or speaking about it. My mother grew up with a lot of discrimination. So there was no, a celebration. It was, very quiet. And, later in life, when asked that question, about my Indigenous identity, and this was, around the time of what's known as your Saturn return, if anybody's into astrology. And I, started to ask those questions. Okay, so I hear these stories, but is this true? And where do I find more evidence of it? And it's one of the things that I've realized walking this journey is that I need to ask. We need to ask, and it's in the asking that things can be revealed to us, right? So the documentation shows up from the St. Boniface Historical Society in Manitoba to actually substantiate what my family has said, right? The scripts, copies of the scripts of the lands that were supposedly given to Métis people, 160 acres back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So, it was in that a slow emerging for me to really embrace. And then, of course, living on other territories. And I'm so grateful for everyone, putting in where they're from, that we acknowledge that. That's the beginning of the acknowledgement, is that, there is a very delicate balance with this, to learn the protocols of the lands. I don't know a lot of the language of this land, but I do know a few words. And I'm really grateful that that awareness is coming more into people, that we can actually speak the vibration of the land. So, for instance, here on these territories, in the Squamish territories, one of their sacred teachings is called Shen Shen Sui, the word Shen Shen Sui. And that means hold each other up. And I find that it's like, wow, that's a powerful way for us to be living and walking. And, I'm really grateful for some of the friends that I've met, whether they're from the Musqueam Nation, who are supporting my love of this living world. And that, are, as I walk this, I do it quietly and humbly and with deep respect, that I get to live here in this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, LoriAnn. That was a beautiful response. And it is for me, that's such a big question, because so many of us we don't live necessarily in our ancestral lands. And so, no matter what your heritage is, it's like, how do you make a home
Mm.
in a place that's someone else's ancestral lands? And how do you square that? And so, yeah, thank you for that thoughtful
Mm. And
response.
and Paul, Keith, sorry, that what also comes up is, that question when I was really reflecting on it in my life, not just your question today, but in my life, was, oh, how could we reconcile with the lands? How
Mm,
can we show the lands and waters that we care?
mm,
What I've noticed in my travels is we've taken out so much of our native plants, which
yeah.
affect the whole ecosystem. The insects, the birds, the ones that fly, the creepy crawlers, the four-leggeds, all of those beautiful relatives. And I started to realize in this sharing of knowledge was to bring that awareness that what we can do to show our love is to replant what has always been here.
Mm,
So it's not just about us as the two-leggeds,
mm.
that we live in a family that's very diverse, whether that's people, but also with our other living relatives, that how do we show them that we respect this land?
Thank you. That's so important. I think that that gratitude and that reciprocity with the more than human. Um, so early in your book, you relate a story about plants remembering when we
Mm.
forget. I find this really provocative. Um,
Mm.
and in some ways it speaks to like a kind of a blood memory, but blood memory for plants, which is really interesting. And then as something that we can somehow access through a relational field. I guess I wonder, can you tell us a bit more about this? And do you have any examples of a plant or plants that have helped you to remember something that you've forgotten or jog your memory about, like, say, forgotten or lost ancestral knowledge?
Mm. Well, a few things kind of come up. One was this story. When people come and I do teachings, I'm always curious as to why people have joined the circle. And this one woman arrived clutching her notebook. And as she introduced herself, she was saying how she really had wished she had listened to her grandmother or recorded or written some of the teachings that her grandmother had shared. And someone else in the group said, but the plants remember. And so I love that, because it's like, yeah, we don't necessarily need to go to the books or the internet. We just need to sit. We just need to tune into our body. And one of the teachings that was shared with me from my teacher, Don Olson. So he's still teaching. He's got grassroots herbalism. He's here on Vancouver Island. And it's known as plant attunement. And of course, we see that in other teachings, like Elliot Cohen with Plant Spirit Medicine, or any of the books by Stephen Booner, where we get quiet and we get still and we listen and we introduce ourselves. And then we ask those questions. And it's so beautiful and amazing when we actually take that time. What we discover is that there is this communication. And what we also, for me, what I've realized is how much colonial programming has been affecting us, that is separating us from this relationship. That these practices are not lost. It's just a matter of us sitting again and being still, that we can ask those questions. So this time that I was sitting with my teacher, Dawn, in the class, I think it was a calendula flower I was sitting with. And that's a pretty common plant that we can find all over. I write about calendula in the book. And, you all of a sudden get these sensations, and then maybe words come to you, or maybe an emotion. Like, emotions are really powerful indicators of communication. And as we shared with the group later, I was like in awe, to be confirmed what it is that was being shared with me, that, scientific research now says, yes, this plant, it is a really amazing plant for healing the skin, right? It goes into the deeper layers of the epidermis, and that it can help repair. And it's just this, wow, all I have to do is just be quiet and trust what's coming to me. And then, of course, I can go in the books and then confirm what is being shared. I'd also just add there, Keith, is that what I also found in doing the research, and having the ethnobotany books and all the other books, and going online, this one day I just flipped. It's a beautiful big ethnobotany book by Daniel Moorman, and I just flipped the book open, and it came to the page on Coreopsis, and it was talking about Coreopsis bigelovi. And I was like, oh my goodness, wow, Bigelow is my given name. So my given name when I was born is LoriAnn Bigelow. And here was this plant that one of my relatives' name is on this plant. And so it was just this beautiful place of really opening myself up to be guided as to what I wanted to share in this book with all of you.
That's really lovely. Thank you. I guess following up on that question, I wonder if you'd be willing to share some sort of reflections on any kind of special relationships that you have with specific plants. And what is the nature of those relationships, and how did those relationships develop?
Mm-hmm. Well, this morning as I was reflecting on that, it was, a few different plants sort of came to mind. And, one is dandelion. I speak a lot about dandelion when I go and teach. I go into a lot of schools. I'm always looking for native plants on the school ground, and I'm not always super successful, but sure enough, dandelion is there. And of course, that's one of our ancestral plants. Being of mixed heritage, This is the plant we actually brought over to these lands so that we had food and medicine. So that was one that kind of jumped in. Another one is cannabis. I think she's an amazing teacher. She also has a bit of an edge to her. So, like so many plants, we have to really respect these master plants that really open up our consciousness and to have reverence for them. So really respect that. And I'm sorry on some level that these teachings aren't really brought to our youth so that they can make some good decisions as they, start to discover who they are. Another one that came to mind is St. John's wort. This is one that is really a beautiful medicine to help us with those cloudy days. And so I infuse it in oils, and it's like liquid sunshine. So it really helps with mild depression. And of course, a lot of plants too can have interactions. So we always have to be really mindful if we're on some kind of medication that there could be an interaction. And food can have interactions with medications. Coffee, I just learned today, coffee is a big one that can have interactions with medications, right? So this world of discovery is really amazing. And then really what I do want to share with you is the spirit plant of tobacco. And so being asked to write this book was, quite a task for me. I wasn't sure that I could stay focused with a neurodivergent brain. I really didn't know if I could, sit still enough that I could, complete this task. So every day I had to sit with some tobacco and do my prayers. And it really helped me to stay focused, to talk to my ancestors, to help for that, ask for that help. And when I think about these plants right here, tobacco, cannabis, dandelion, St. John's wort, I would say these plants have been vilified in so many different ways. And to always be curious. Who are they? And what are we being told? What is this narrative? And is this the truth? In the book, when I write about tobacco, I mention how the nicotine is addictive. Now, if we think about this, the nicotine is actually working to release dopamine, GABA, there's a few different things off the top of my head. Sorry, I've forgotten what they are. So there are a couple different molecules that are actually being released in the brain when we have nicotine, when we have tobacco. I'm like, of course it's addictive. Like food is addictive, pleasure is addictive, moving our bodies is addictive because all of these actions actually release dopamine in the body. Now, the other thing that I would say is it's a really strong medicine. So we have to understand her or them, him, I feel like the plants hold both spirits, that we need to have those teachings so we don't abuse her. And of course, a cigarette to me is not tobacco. It's a substance that is full of something like 700 different chemicals in there that make it even more addictive. So, it's really asking those questions and then having the truth revealed to us as to how they're really helpful for our bodies, for our minds, for our spirits.
Thank you, LoriAnn. I really appreciate that kind of call to really critically assess the things that we're told, the narratives that we're told around these different plants and their worth or whatever, or what they are, who they are. Um, I wonder if you'd mind if I followed up on something that you just shared. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you were mentioning cannabis, and I know that it's legal here in Canada. That plant, they're legal here in Canada, and so I use cannabis like to help me sleep, and many other people do, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful addition to my life. Um, you'd mentioned something about the youth, and I wonder if you could like let's pretend for a moment that there were I don't know, 105. I see there's 105 participants. What if these were
Mhm.
105 young people who maybe, had encountered or were using or were curious about cannabis, but maybe didn't know a whole lot about it? What would you tell them, or what would you want to share with them to help them come into relation with that plant in a good way?
Well, like all plants, they have a spirit. And I would say that we actually need to hold circles
Mm,
and have a ceremony, that we have a ritual. And it's what's missing. And
mm,
we're really seeking um, how we behave really in this world, how we walk as a two-legged. And I feel that in that ceremony that it's not about it becoming recreational. It's about us really seeing her for the teachings that she brings, the healings that she brings. I tend to think of a lot of times I say plants as she. That's just because I recognize them as living, but of course they are truly both spirits. Um, and what's happening in the cannabis industry, I really feel is actually um, dishonoring
mm,
her in terms of we're doing all these blends, we're making them like super strong THC. You know, back in the 70s when I first had cannabis as a child, it was like 4%. And now it's, 25% or more. And I remember the first time I had cannabis after many years of not having cannabis, and this was probably 15 years ago or longer. I was
mm,
like, I was in outer space. And I could, I felt really uncomfortable at first until my
mm.
friend, who I'd only taken one, toke or one puff from,
Wow.
said, Lori, it's a plant spirit medicine. And in that moment, it changed my relationship. And I had the most profound, beautiful evening with her as she was teaching me so much about our living world, about me, about our love, about, how we show up. So
Mm.
I feel like it's just recreational. Yes, of course, there's medicinal properties to her, but I feel like we're missing the spiritual aspect of this plant and the gifts that she offers.
I agree with you 100%. And I wonder too, like if just to follow up on that really quickly, and then we can move on. I don't want to dominate the conversation with cannabis, although I love that plant. But I just wonder if you were to what could you envision as a way that like how could we collectively be in right relation with that plant? Like thinking about the like you'd mentioned ritual before, but I'm thinking about law and policy, and I'm thinking about like I don't know, like growers and product developers and all of that stuff and recreation. Like, what would it look like as a society at a societal level to be in right relation with that plant?
That we grow her,
Yeah,
right? Like here
yeah.
in British Columbia, you can grow four of your own plants. When I was
Hmm.
in Montreal last year, their policy is that you cannot grow your own plants.
Hmm.
And, there's this element for me that we have, if we look back in history, we've had a long history, not just with cannabis, with all of these different plants, right? And we
Hmm.
have some that are, scheduled in different categories that part of me thinks the government, that's not for me on some level, it's not their
Hmm.
business.
Yeah.
This should be put back into the hands of our elders, our knowledge keepers, our medicine people, and not make it another commodity. And that's what I'm seeing with plants, of course, is that we make them commodities. And in the teachings of Elliot Cohen in plant medicines or plant spirit medicine, and unfortunately Elliot's now passed, but this beautiful plant, he talked about that our healing can be done just by sitting with the energy of the plant.
Mm.
So that we don't have to look at plants as utility, that, we're ingesting them, that we're actually just sitting with them and that we can learn from them. And of course, I hear that from a lot of people I teach,
Mm.
Lori, I go to the woods and the trees are talking to me. So if this is true, then wow, then on some level, we don't even need to make the tea with them.
Mm. Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left before we start with audience questions. But I do have another question I'd like to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so as we discussed earlier, the American Thanksgiving was last week. And as many members of the audience are probably aware, Indigenous peoples have a nuanced and profound approach to giving thanks, to reciprocity. And yeah, we talked a little bit about the Thanksgiving address earlier. Um, I guess, you'd mentioned, I think we talked about ritual you talked about ritual in one of your responses as a way to be in right relation. I wonder if you could share like elements of your practice that center gratitude towards our plantee cousins.
Mm. Well, a couple of years ago, when all of this conversation started to really come to our awareness around Thanksgiving, was my girlfriend and I, we changed the name to Giving Thanks Day,
Mm. Like that.
right? So just by shifting the words, it
Mm.
brings a different energy to it. Like words have a vibration. And so I really like that, because then it really made people kind of sit up a bit. What do you mean giving thanks? And,
Mm.
for me, I have such a deep gratitude for the lands and the waters. Like I'm just in awe of their beauty and their generosity and their gifts and, and their teachings.
Mhm.
When I heard Robin Wall Kimmer speak one time, because as I grew up on the lands of the Squamish people and not knowing really about the history of my family, I recognized that the plants truly are um, my my elders. And with that deep, deep love and teaching, I really started to think about, oh, how could we help? How could we make a
Mm.
difference? How could we create a legacy? And not necessarily a legacy with my name on it. So even though I did that with this book, um, it was like, yeah, how can I really show my gratitude? And in that question, what showed up was a medicine person from Ecuador, from the
Oh,
Amazon,
wow. Wow.
who was looking for solidarity and help to buy back
Mm.
his ancestral lands. And
Wow.
this was about 8 years ago.
Mm.
And I had a little bit of money left from my parents' inheritance, about $30,000. And all I could think about when I met him and as he shared his story was, okay, how much shall I give him? Five, 10, or all of it? And after a couple weeks of
Wow.
spending time with him, I gifted him $30,000 to buy back a sacred mountain in Ecuador that I've
Wow.
had the
Wow.
pleasure of walking in the
Ooh.
last year up these
Wow.
lands where the jaguar lives, where the armadillo
Wow.
lives, where we have that huge diversity of plants and insects and birds.
Wow.
I love birds. That's why I changed my name to LoriAnn Bird, because my great great grandmother's name was Sarah Bird. And
Wow.
I so it was a small offering, really, a
Mm.
small
Wow.
offering. But and here we are on giving thanks Tuesday,
Yeah.
that in our moment of thinking of how we can affect change, because we hold that key, we hold that seed, in my view. And the other thing that really has come through in the last couple of years, as I'm seeing the sterility of my city that I've been living in for 40 years, so what we call Vancouver, and we're logging this beautiful park, Stanley Park, which is a world-known park, and it's being logged, and trees are being cut down, and the bird life is disappearing, and we don't have an understanding of how our ecosystem actually works. That, what I've been sharing, because I really think of myself as a messenger, is that we need to start saving the seeds, collecting seeds, saving seeds, bringing back our native plants. And more than anything, we need to be planting trees all over North America, all over Turtle Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's sunny today. It's beautiful out, but it shouldn't be sunny. It should be cloudy and raining right now. We live in a rainforest and we are just not getting that rain. And without those trees, we're not going to have clean water. And that's on my mind a lot. Growing food, clean water, and growing trees.
Thank you so much, LoriAnn. Um, I think now maybe we can move into some questions from the audience. So let's see here. Lindsay Tyree was wondering about the Daniel Mormon book and wondering if that was his giant opus, the Native American Ethnobotany.
Yes, yes,
Okay, good. Just
absolutely.
wanted to confirm that. Great. I
Yeah,
thought so, but
beautiful, beautiful book. If you can get your hands on there, on that book, I highly, highly recommend it. It is so much fun to go. It's kind of like digging, you just
yeah.
dig in.
It's a mile wide, that's for sure. It's encyclopedic in scope. Yeah. Yeah. And C.H. Drake is wondering, what are your thoughts about natural resource departments, deconstruct that, calling certain plants invasive?
Oh, thank you for that question. Love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, I realize if I'm calling something invasive, then I need to look at myself as invasive. Okay, that was the first thing. The second was I was like, no, well, just a sec. So let's use this example of Himalayan blackberry, which is quite prevalent here in British Columbia. It is a teacher, and
Mm,
she has really beautiful gifts to offer. One is her berry, which is of all the berries, has the highest amount of iron.
mm,
Now, we're not picking the berries. Nobody's out there picking the
mm,
berries. And so what does she do? She sends down another cane and she starts to take over space because we're not tending the garden. And in tending that garden, as we're clipping those long canes and we take off the outer skin, we now have um, a resource, a product, material, a gift for weaving. And these hands are tools and they
mm,
connect with our mental health. So the more we're actually engaging with our hands the way we used to when we would sit and listen to stories as we were shelling peas and whittling and organizing and, crocheting or knitting, it actually helped with our mental health.
mm,
When television was invented, I think it was 1934, 1935, we stopped listening and we started watching. And we see this rise in mental health issue. Of course, her root has a beautiful medicine for dyeing the hair. So, I'm starting to get gray. I could actually use that root to bring back my nice dark black color. And there's a medicine for diarrhea. So and medicines with the leaf to wash the face when we have bacteria growing on the skin. So all of a sudden I was like, wow, look at the gifts that she's offering. And of course, this is a place for the birds to seek
mm,
refuge and to build their homes and their nests.
mm,
So, in this idea of invasive, what it's actually doing is it's inviting us to put our hands back in the earth again, right? And some plants, we are, as an invasive plant, they're not going to go away. But what I do is I look for their gifts. And what I want to
mm,
do is make sure they don't take up all the space. And that's
mm,
what I see us as the two-leggeds. We're taking up
mm,
so much space that we're not making room
mm,
for our other relatives to be here, for our children
mm,
to witness.
mm. Wow. Thank you. There is another question and there's a really lovely comment. Maybe I'll read the comment and then I can ask you the question. Okay, so Tamara said, great discussion. I attend tribal college and work at our college sovereignty garden as an intern for our land grant department. This is such impactful work, miigwech. Thank you,
Beautiful.
Tamara.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tamara. Sweet.
And Christy has a question. Christy's wondering, how can we learn more about the Indigenous people who lived on our land by observing plants? Not only what is there, but where certain plants are concentrated.
Okay, say that question again, Keith. It's what can
It's
we
very,
learn from our Indigenous neighbors?
it's very specific. It's a good question. How
Yeah.
can we learn more about the Indigenous people who lived
Okay.
on our land, probably still do,
Yeah.
by observing plants, not only what is there, but where certain plants are concentrated? So like plant distribution, how can
Okay.
that,
Okay.
yeah.
I think what's coming in for me is that walking the lands here, and we don't have a lot of wild lands left here in the city.
Mm,
What I came across one day was a garden of salal berries and native
mm,
blackberries.
ooh,
And, I came in onto the site and all of a sudden I just stopped because I was like, wow, I don't think anybody remembers that this is here.
mm,
And
mm,
I then went to visit my elder out in Musqueam and I shared with her what I had discovered. And she was like, oh yeah, that was our garden. Our village was like 100 meters from there down on the ocean. And I was like, I felt so honored that I actually came upon that, but maybe I was guided so that
mm,
that it was confirmation that yes, of course they
mm,
had gardens. Of course
mm,
they had, places that were their special patch,
mm,
their medicine patch. And that 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 it's that confirmation, of course they were in the relationship, deep relationship with their living world that
mm,
gives us life. Um, One of the things that, came to me many years ago, I was harvesting some salmon berries, which have been one of my teachers here on this land. They always kind of poke at me and tell me when I've had enough, right? They start to poke at me. You have enough berries. You can come back tomorrow, but
mm,
you've got your fill. And this
mhm,
song came to me. I wasn't here on Squamish territories. I was in Lilwat territories. And it made me realize that language actually comes from the land. And that's, what I'd really love to see and hear moving ourselves into the future is that we actually start to speak the language or learn the words of the plants, what they're called through our indigenous neighbors.
mm,
What is the name of the salmonberry that I could actually greet
mm,
her in that name that was gifted to the people so we knew who she was. And that's a frequency,
mm,
right? That
mm,
that we start to live in a
mm,
frequency of love and care. That's what responsibility means, right? That we're
mm,
responding and we're taking care of each other.
mm. Oh, it's beautiful. And what a wonderful story too. Thank you for sharing that. That must have been so like special to have encountered the Solal garden and then have realized upon talking to the elder that this was near a village site. That's incredible. Related to that, there is another very pragmatic question Amy Wenner has asked. But before I read that, there's a comment. Christy has a comment that's super interesting and relates to what you just shared. So Christy
Mm.
wrote, yes, I found an area with mature spice bush in a straight row that appears intentionally planted. Nearby are witch hazel and a few other plants I've not found in similar areas on our wild 80-acre property. It feels as if a story is there. Yeah, it sure does to me too. What do you think about that, Lori?
Oh, so beautiful. It
Yeah.
sounds like you need to just go and sit and see what else comes. And also, what I would also share with you, this comes from Michelle Small Wright. She did Paralandra. There's a bunch of books
Mm,
out there on how we actually help to repair the land. So,
mm,
there are these stories on the land, but there is also genocide on the land, wars on the land, and that there are practices that we can actually do to help to repair the land as well as we repair, our own hearts. So something to
Okay.
consider when we're sitting out in nature.
Thank you. So Amy Wenner has like I said, a very pragmatic question. I have so many, and Barbara Knoll asks, is that Michelle Small, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay, got it.
yeah.
Okay, so Amy Wenner has asked a very practical question. I have so many plants, both in pots and growing on my small plot of land. How do I listen to just one? Do I need to move the others to a different room, for example, if I want to work with one at a time in my office? Very practical.
Mm,
I like that.
yeah. Um, well, I remember when I first started teaching, and I felt like the plants were like, talk about me, tell them about me. So I get that. Um, and I always say to people, you know, start with one plant and sit with that plant for the season or maybe even the year. What do I notice over the course of the year? How this plant is responding?
Mm,
What is it sharing? Here in the city, what I learned is that when plants are going through stress, they produce seeds to ensure the next generation.
mm,
So when that plant feels that it's going to die because it's not getting enough water or the roots have been affected with all this development, they'll start that reproduction. So you know, who are we tripping over? Who are we swearing at? Who are we, going, I have so much of this plant. Like in the house that I
mm,
used to live at, I had a lot of lemon balm around the house. And lemon balm's really good for the nervous system. And I have a very high energy nervous system. So I find plants kind of show up
mm,
for us, like the St. John's wort that I mentioned earlier. She's a really good medicine for me during the winter months. So, start to get curious who's wanting your attention of all those plants that you have, or who are you
yeah,
noticing the most that
yeah.
is saying, let's start the relationship. And then
Mm,
we move from the next one to the next one. We might find over time that we just really have some really strong friends that stay with us for a long time and others that come and go, just kind of like with
mm.
us in our own passage.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I find something very similar too. Some plants seem to be a lot noisier than others,
Mm.
and I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's just their personality. But and I guess following up on that, from your experience, do you find have you encountered any plants that you found remarkably noisy, or any plants that you found particularly retiring or bashful?
Mm. Well, you know what? You actually made me think of this experience that I had. What I noticed, for instance, with orchids is
Mm,
they get forced into blooming. So we buy this beautiful orchid or we gift it to someone. And then at some point, after a couple of weeks, her blooms fall off and then she kind of rests. And she might rest for a long time. She might rest for a good year. So one January day, this was about 5 years ago, I'm walking through the neighborhood and someone has put out 4 orchid plants that are going to die if I don't pick them up. So I adopt them. I grab these
mm,
4 plants and I take them home. And I learn how that they like to drink the water
mm,
from the bottom of a dish, and you do that once a week. And I put them in my kitchen, so every time I was washing my dishes, I could see them, and I was just loving them because I was like, "Wow, you're so amazing." And what I
wow.
discovered is they would bloom either on my mother's birthday in March, my mom has
Ooh,
passed, or on my dad's birthday in April, who's also
wow.
passed.
That's wild.
It is. So it's, we're just a frequency of love. The truth is we're just that frequency. And so when we show our love, it's responding back to us.
That's so great. I totally get that. I totally get that. I love that actually. Yeah. And I realize, well, thanks to Paul, I realized that I'd missed a question earlier. So I'll read that now. My apologies to Julie. I had responded to part of your question, Julie. And then I think I just was so entranced by your LoriAnn's responses that I lost it.
Mm.
So Julie's wondering, do you have experience using the Plants Play device from Italy that allows us to listen to plants, trees, and fungi? And if so, if you have used this Plants Play device, how do you use the recordings? And Julia said that they collaborate with dancers and musicians and do outdoor celebrations with trees in Olympia, Washington. Yeah, thanks for that question, Julie.
Mm. I went to Dam and Herd last year in northern Italy. I've a couple times I've been to Turin for the slow food movement.
Ooh.
And I went up to that spiritual community. I was really curious about them. And I believe that's actually where it was developed. And I've heard it, I haven't heard it live, but
Mm.
oh no, sorry. Let me say that again. My girlfriend bought one and she's like, she put it on the plant and the plant didn't say a word. A little while later, she put it on the plant and the plant started to sing. So
Wow.
just like us, like sometimes we're like, here, do your performance,
Mhm.
when it's like, no, I'm sleeping right now. I want to be quiet. And so we really see over and over with so many, the technology, what was his name? Cleve Baxter, who had, created the, what's that machine called again? Lie detector test, right? How he showed that the plants were responding even through our thoughts, right? We
That's
have,
wow.
yeah. So, they're alive.
Yeah, no question, no question. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so there's two more questions. So one, Amy C. Germania has asked, how can non-Indigenous folks work with Indigenous folks and learn from them rather than appropriating their cultures?
Well, it's a great practice in listening
Hmm.
for us to learn how to sit and listen again and then ask how we can be in service.
Hmm.
What is it that they need? How do we find our voices? How do we show up and say no to pipelines across our country? How do we show up at the old growth forests? Like
Hmm.
that's what's happening with our youth right now. They're up in Fairy Creek over on Vancouver Island. They're
Oh,
risking their
right.
lives right now
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
to say to the extractors, enough is enough. We have
Wow.
very little of our old growth forest left on really on the planet.
Hmm.
And so I feel that we just come humbly,
Hmm.
we come,
Yeah.
with some gifts to say thank you for teaching us. And I would
Hmm.
also say that when we really look at the root of teachings,
Hmm.
they are similar to all cultures,
Hmm.
that we respect what gives us life. And the what I found out as I was doing the research for the book, in the beginning of the book, I talk about the responsibility, relationship, reciprocity, reverence. And what I learned about respect is that's not intrinsic to who we are. We have to be taught how to
Hmm.
respect.
Hmm.
And we're living in such a fast-paced world. We're, always expecting more, gratification all the time
Hmm.
without actually doing the work. And of course, it always feels empty. And then we're
Yeah.
seeking more because we haven't done the deep work, right? We haven't humbled ourselves and listened, and then started practices of that reciprocity.
Thank you. So I think we've got about 1 or 2 minutes left before we have to turn it over to Paul, and we've got two questions. Do you want me to ask the two questions and see if you can respond, or do you just want to go for one? What would be your
Oh,
preference?
let's go with the first one and see how quickly I can.
Sure. Sure. Okay. No, and not to pressure you. I don't mean to do
Okay.
that. But
No.
okay. So can traditional ecological knowledge be used alongside Western science, or are the two incompatible? And this is from Aubrey, and Aubrey has also said that they've heard one elder refer to Western science as lacking heart and soul.
Well, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmer, I think is such an amazing book if you haven't had a chance to read it, because, in that metaphor of the three braids, we have scientific knowledge, we have indigenous ways of being, but we also have plant wisdom. And so I really feel like all those three strands need to be woven together to take us into the future. Um, and science, unfortunately, it's going through a renaissance. I'd like to say that it's really going through a renaissance, just like so many other institutions right now. And I think they're going to catch up with indigenous ways of knowing. And to really trust, like I said earlier, when we're doing that plant attunement, when we're really listening to our bodies, that we're trusting that information that's coming to us.
Mm,
And for me, we're being on the land, I just
mm,
ask, how do you want me to walk? How can I be in service? And then
mm,
something starts to shape me. Nobody taught me how to
mm.
do gardening, but I feel like the garden's teaching me how to do gardening.
Wow. And interestingly, maybe this is your intuition kicking in again, but I think you've pretty much answered um, oh, thanks, Stephen. That's great.
Mm,
You pretty much answered the final question, Donna's final question about attending to plants. So yeah,
mm,
thank you for that. This has been wonderful, LoriAnn. It's been so good to meet you, and what a pleasure to engage with your work and your ideas. Thank you so
mm.
much. With that, Paul, are you ready to
Yeah.
offer some closing remarks?
Yes, thank you. I was really touched by your conversation, both of you, and you're just so sharing and honest, and so I just want to thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives today. Both of you, both Lorianne and Keith. It was just a fascinating
Mm,
conversation, and thanks a lot to the audience as well. I mean, for sharing your stimulating questions, even though we couldn't get to them all. I really do recommend, Lorianne's book. It's just a beautiful book. It has a lot of wonderful artwork inside. I don't know if you can see it, but anyway, probably not with this screen. But anyway, it's a very beautiful book. And just think if you want to learn more about Lorianne's thoughts and about these plants, to consider checking out her book. So anyway, this program has been one of a number of online events, a series from the
mm.
Plant Initiative about the human-plant connection, and we do plan to host more of these in 2026. So please stay tuned. And thanks again for attending today. As I mentioned before, this is being recorded. I'll post this hopefully on our YouTube channel later today. And it's just open to anyone, and we hope that people will continue to watch this and share it with others. And again, if you'd like to support these types of programs from the Plant Initiative, we're always appreciative of donations through our website at plantinitiative.org. But we're also very happy to share these programs with you. So thanks to everyone for joining us today, and really appreciate it. Any final words that you'd like to say, Lori, again?
Wow, I'm just, really touched by people taking the time, your good words, to share this message, really, that there's some work to do, but we can regenerate our earth very quickly when we put our hands back in and ask for that guidance. So again, and it's Giving Tuesday, right? So,
Oh,
consider who you want to, help to support to continue doing good work. Thank you so
oh,
much, Paul, and
yeah.
to you, Keith, also.
Well, thanks everyone, and take care.
Thank you, everybody. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.